Hi, everyone. How are you? Thank you so much for joining this webinar. I am Lisa Ling, and I am the executive producer and host of This is Life on CNN. And I am also on the board of Fostering Media Connections, which is a national nonprofit media outlet that focuses on issues facing vulnerable children and their families. I became acquainted with FMC when I was working on an episode of my previous show, Our America, which was on Oprah's own network, about the foster care system here in Los Angeles. And the founder of FMC, Daniel Heimpel, who I hope is watching right now, hi Daniel, was just invaluable to us as a resource. He really helped us open a lot of doors. And he and FMC were also incredibly helpful on my current show, This is Life on CNN, for an episode that we produced about the impact that Ohio's years-long opioid problem has had on its youngest victims, the children of opioid addicts, which is going to air in November. Now, for those of you who don't know, FMC produces a number of publications, including the one that we are going to be talking about today, the Imprint, which is a daily news publication dedicated to rigorous, in-depth journalism focused on families and the systems that impact their lives. And we are talking about the Imprint because a new editor has joined to helm it, someone with extensive investigative experience in covering a wide range of issues. Karen, give us another wave. There she is. And I want to tell you a bit about Karen because she is just such an incredibly impressive human. She covered child welfare and juvenile justice for the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Jose Mercury News. Her projects have exposed inhumane conditions in youth prisons, injustice in the dependency courts, and financial abuse of the elderly and disabled. Her most recent projects exposed hundreds of questionable arrests in California's children's shelters and the excessive use of psychotropics in the foster care system, which was an incredibly powerful and comprehensive 7-part series for the Mercury News. She was a 2006 Knight Fellow at Stanford University and has won numerous journalism honors over her 27-year career, including being named finalist for the Goldsmith Prize for Investigative Reporting, the American Bar Association's Silver Gavel Award, and the Haywood Braun Award. Her work has led to 9 state laws, overhauled institutions, and improved public contracts with the nation's most vulnerable populations. I can speak on behalf of everyone at FMC to say that we are so thrilled and so fortunate to have someone as esteemed as Karen to be leading the Imprint. And now just a couple housekeeping things. After Karen and I have a discussion about the future of the Imprint, we're going to want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will do our best to get to as many of them after we have our talk. So Karen, welcome to the webinar and welcome to the Imprint. As I was saying, you have such an impressive resume and have conducted so many extensive and award-winning investigations for major publications. So why did you want to come lead one that is dedicated to covering issues pertaining to vulnerable children and their families?
Well, before I answer that, I'm already subverting the rules of the webinar. But Lisa, I just wanted to say, first of all, acknowledge that it's really an honor and a privilege to be here interviewed by you. Many more of you know of Lisa Ling than you know of me. And if you've seen her in action, Lisa is really a force as a journalist. She's a powerful presence, and she has an incredible empathetic and really intense connection with the people that she interviews and the issues that she covers. And when Lisa Ling cares, you care. And so that's really her power and her strength. And I'm pleased that we're having this conversation, Lisa, and I thank you for doing this. And I also want to acknowledge Talia Henderson, who's coordinated this webinar and got the word out. And thank you to all of you who are joining today. These are like really, really like horrifically difficult times for everyone. And I thought we should just acknowledge that you're either struggling physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, like in some way. I know we're all going through hard times, or people we love are going through hard times. So I really appreciate you guys joining us today for this event. I also, before I answer your question, I want to acknowledge the 2 young people that appeared on the promotional posters for this event. I want to talk about them because their faces and their images are very intentionally used. Joseph Jones helped us tell a story about aging out of foster care at age 21, which for those of you who are the parents of young adults, you know that, you know, I'm 50, I'm pushing 54, and I call my mom several times a day for advice and help. So, you know, let it be known that we all need people to help us, and we are out in the world and you've struggled and you've been raised by a system. People like Joseph are miraculous beings in their ability to navigate the world on their own at age 21. And we can't tell these stories without the bravery of young people like this, because statistics and reports and experts and all those kinds of voices, while they're important, you know, you don't care about these stories until you see these beautiful young people. And then Maritza had an amazing story. We wrote about both of these young people in a recent series on extended foster care, which is the system that a lot of people in the general public may not be aware of. Between age 18 and 21, you can stay in foster care in most parts of the country, getting help with housing and a stipend and other things. And Maritza at 17 was sleeping in a jungle gym underneath a swing set outside her high school because her caregivers had died, and her pro bono attorney could not get her into foster care to get those supports. She had to take the extraordinary measure of getting truancy charges filed on her client. She actually had to get her in to extended foster care through the criminal justice system, so to speak, so that she could take part in these services. So again, I really want to start this conversation telling you all what a brave, incredibly brave thing it is to do, to not only talk to a journalist, but to tell this journalist who is a stranger about your deepest, most difficult struggles, your emotional pain and trauma. I mean, it takes an incredible amount of bravery, and I'm really appreciative to these two young folks in particular who helped us put a face on this. Juvenile court judges will tell you when they don't have a child in court or a young person, it's a file, right? But if they have even a picture of a kid, it transforms all the conversations. So please look on these faces and admire their incredible beauty, and they really are inspiration. So
I can see why Karen is the right person for this job, because not only does she have such an extensive resume, but she really has such a loving heart. So thank you for including them, Karen.
Except for now, I forgot your question. So no,
answer the question.
So basically, yes, this is a really terrific move for me because I have worked at daily newspapers for many, many, many years. And I have kind of been on the front lines of doing these stories and reporting and writing and doing investigative projects on the child welfare and juvenile justice beats. And I've kind of come to a point in my career and my life where it's really, really exciting for me to have the opportunity to help foster and grow and develop and nurture this kind of reporting among the staff here, which I'm going to introduce to you as well when I talk about their stories, but also we work in conjunction with other newspapers and other outlets. So, you know, we're working with reporters at different outlets. We co-publish in different newspapers. So really we try to take our journalism and kind of extend it into the mainstream media whenever we can.
Karen, I want to talk more about the staff and the team, but first I mentioned in your bio, because I think we want to get to know you a little bit better. First, I mentioned in your bio that your work has led to 9 state laws and overhauled institutions and improved public contracts for underserved communities. So I'm wondering if you can just take a couple minutes to talk about some of those particular stories that you've reported that have effectively ignited this instrumental change, and what is the role of journalism in doing so and trying to improve the lives of vulnerable communities?
Okay, really appreciate you asking it that way, because it's really hard to mix improving the lives of people with awards, which make you feel good, right? So can we just kind of separate that out, because like that's really cool and it makes you feel really good to go to the big fancy dinner and like go up on stage and all that. But like the really important thing is that it's that sunlight is an antiseptic, okay? And mainstream news media, for lack of a better description, you know, there are these fundamentals of journalism. You have to cover the courts, right? The criminal courts. You always cover politics. You always cover city hall. You cover the crime beat. You cover the schools beat. But there's never a dedicated, you know, beat to safety net, to social services, to the people that don't have lobbyists, right? To vulnerable, struggling families. So the easy thing about being a journalism in this kind of field where nobody else is prowling is you can get your stories out there because no one else is doing them. So maybe I was strategic in that, but I always looked for, you know, when I was, you know, before I was investigative reporter, when I was, you know, earning my chops on beats, it was always like a municipal beat or a county government beat. And I kind of evolved that into a safety net, social services, and kind of looked at kind of what is a county government really? It's a safety net. You know, they're running the programs that keep people alive, you know, childcare programs and drug treatment programs, and overseeing the child welfare system, the welfare system, those kinds of things. So that's really kind of has been my evolution. And then the great thing about journalism is if you do your job and if you do it well, and if you do obsessive fact checking, and you get it right, and you tell your stories in a powerful way, and you take enough time to get them right, you can have an impact. So that's the really gratifying thing about journalism. And you know, you do see results. And so it's personally gratifying, but more importantly, it's gratifying for the people that you're writing about, because the reason they're allowing themselves to be so exposed is in the hopes that change will come.
And Karen, the other day we spoke on the phone about how, you know, at other news outlets, they only cover these kinds of stories when there's a crisis, right? And that is not the case for the Imprint. Can you talk about that a bit?
No, it's not the case at all. And I think if I'm allowed to get on my bragging about the Imprint bandwagon, I am happy to.
Please, that's why we're here.
Okay, because what we offer here at the Imprint, so we're a very small shop. We are small and we are strong. So myself and John Kelly and Kim Hansel, and then we work with 4 reporters, 2 in LA and 2 in New York are full-time, and they are Sarah Tiano and Jeremy Ludenbach in LA. And then in New York, we have Michael Fitzgerald and Megan Kahn. And then we have freelancers who work for us. We've had some terrific freelancers. We have them now in Washington, in Texas, of course, I'm going to forget the states, Minnesota, are kind of our coverage areas where we're expanding now. And through kind of a mix of our staff reporters and these freelance writers, we are really able to, we have a staff that we're not just flying in, parachuting into a story when a kid dies in foster care, okay? We're not just getting easy, low-hanging fruit kinds of stories. What we're doing is our reporters are really steeped in the systems that they're reporting about. In other words, we understand what goes into a child abuse and neglect investigation. We understand that a court system oversees foster care. That's something the general public may not even know. We understand all the players in these systems. We understand the research. We understand what kind of social science goes into these decisions and these systems. And our work is just as much about the juvenile justice system. So in that context, we understand the hazards to the developing brain when you lock someone in a cell, okay? We understand how kids are part of children, and families are parts of families. They're not just isolated beings that you can just pluck out of their origin unit. We also have a particular attention to trauma. So we understand that when we talk to people, we have to be very mindful of what kinds of ways that the people we interview will be experiencing our questions. We have to be kind to them. We have to be gentle. We have to let people take breaks. We know that people cry. You know, I have a reporter who has done an interview with a mom who she lost multiple children to the foster care system, and now she's regained custody of them. And she really, really wants to tell her story, but sometimes it gets too much. So, we take a break. We call her back later. We check in with her. These are the kinds of things that I don't think all journalists kind of pay enough attention to. And I know, Lisa, you and I share this. If someone needs a hug after an interview before COVID, how do you feel about? I noticed sometimes you will hug a person. I was recently at I was on a panel of investigative reporters, and a young reporter raised their hand and asked me how I felt about people hugs. And I think above all, we have to be human beings, especially when we work in these very, very sensitive spaces.
Yeah, I agree with you, Karen. I mean, with what we do on our show, we go really deep, right? And we talk to people and ask them to share with us things that they may have never shared with their closest friends or family members. And it takes a while to convince them that we are a safe place for them to do that. But after they have shared with us, I really consider it to be an immense responsibility to try and ensure that we will tell their story responsibly. And we do, I'm sure you and your reporters feel this way too. You share these moments with these people when they do divulge these things that are so deeply personal. And these moments, they're shared only by you and your team, if you have other people with you. In my case, I have a team with me, but no one knows what that moment was like except for you two. And again, I take that responsibility, and I think we all, and one of the reasons why I really just love what you all at the Imprint do and what FMC does is we respect people's stories and respect the courage that it took for them to want to talk about their stories and invite an audience. And we really do proceed with a kind of caution that I don't think many other outlets do.
Yes, 100% agreed. If I could, I would like to move into telling you about some of the stuff we're covering, because it's really, really exciting.
I would love that. Tell us about things you have covered that you're proud of, and what the future looks like for the Imprint.
Okay, terrific. I will do that. I wanted to just set it up though, because I think the other important thing is not just that we're really cool, nice people and we have the background, but we are actually documenting really, really seismic shifts in society right now that aren't getting documented elsewhere in the media, except for bits and pieces. And I think that unfortunately, what you see when child welfare and juvenile justice are hit and miss kind of thing is you see a big long magazine piece, or you see a story here or a story there, but you don't see these kind of gurglings of movements and changes. And I think there's a really, really dramatic and exciting going on right now. I will definitely tell you, if you would like, about the COVID coverage and the sadness of the obituaries and the kinds of outbreaks and facilities that we've been writing about. I can tell you about that, but I think I just wanted to establish first what we are seeing is twofold. So in the child welfare world, there has long been a lot of discussion of this very scientific and dispassionate term known as disproportionality. And we know, everyone knows, that African American and particularly Native American children are taken from their families and have the kind of most disproportionate involvement with the child welfare system. That is a fact. But what we are seeing now is this really, really remarkable, a true reckoning of the child welfare leaders. It has yet to kind of play out, and we will be documenting this, so keep reading the Imprint. Right now, it is a real, real reckoning, and it is among some very, very high level folks that seem to be taking the lessons from this latest chapter of the civil rights movement that we are living and breathing and experiencing right now, and really, really taking it to heart in a new way. So for instance, you have people like Christine James Brown, the Child Welfare League of America, director who you will read about, CEO and president, who you will read about in our op-ed pages. You have Jerry Milner, who is the highest official in the Trump administration, really, really sharing some remarkable things. And what they are saying is the impact of taking so many Black and brown kids from their families is not, we have talked about it, but we haven't really done anything about it, and we haven't really seen it in a proper context. The other thing that's going on in the pandemic is, in the juvenile justice world, lip service has long been paid to the hazards of detention, locking kids up and what it does to the developing brain and how we have to find alternatives. The pandemic has caused an immediacy. People are leaving these detention facilities like we've never seen before. It's even shocking advocates. And guess what? Everything's okay. You know, there wasn't this sense of urgency when kids were locked up for violating probation or smoking weed or some of these kind of low-level things. There wasn't this kind of urgency. The pandemic has given an urgency where you're seeing not only enormous numbers of people leaving detention facilities, but you're actually seeing calls by people like the governor of California to literally dismantle the state youth justice system, which this is a system that once housed 10,000 children in massive, draconian, really, really, really brutal conditions where kids were locked in cells for 23 hours a day and housed in cages. So the elimination of a system that is now called the Division of Juvenile Justice is huge, and we are documenting that. Now, we are documenting that not only on the news side, but in the opinion pages and through Youth Services Insider, which I'm remiss to go on unless I mention. So we have the reporting staff, and then we have the YSI, which is done by the great John Kelly, known as the Dean of Foster Care. He's probably the most knowledgeable person on state, national, local systems, financing systems, history, legislation. And he was the editor before me, and he's now working as senior editor, and we're basically working together. But so in his column, which is, it's our behind the paywall column, you get all kinds of trade news that you won't get elsewhere. And in our op-ed pages, we have had really an astounding series of voices in recent months, including Brian Samuels, the executive director of Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago. We were just talking about this, you and I, Lisa, former commissioner for the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families. Brian wrote in our op-ed, just as we are overdue in revamping our system, we are delinquent in addressing the institutionalized racism and bias that pervades our and child well-being systems. The systematic separation of children of color from their parents without regard to the lasting trauma it entails is a thread that runs through our nation's history, from slavery to Native American boarding schools and to present day child welfare practice. So the amazing thing about this is John Kelly, in all his wisdom and connections, has also gotten op-eds from Jerry Milner, head of the Trump administration, on these issues. And he has written that we have all in our own ways been part of this problem. He wrote with his special assistant, David Kelly, in a piece that you will read in the Imprint, exclusive, we cannot allow ourselves to repeat the mistakes of the past, where sometimes well-intended but deeply misguided efforts to help children had the opposite effect. We cannot allow the coronavirus to serve as a modern day orphan train that leads to the redistribution of other people's children. Every day that we do not maintain connections between children in care and their parents and siblings is a source of trauma. We have to keep the forefront of our minds in the days, weeks, and months ahead and use it to guide our actions. To lose sight of this, he wrote, is a moral and ethical failing and injustice. And that is the US Children's Bureau top brass saying these things.
Yeah, Karen, I also, as I was telling you earlier, I reposted an opinion, an editorial that you have on your page that was written by Julio Angel Alicia, which the headline is, the time has come for us to stop locking up other people's children. And I just thought that it was such a a thoughtful way to look at uh, juveniles and incarceration. And in this discussion about defunding the police, this is a great piece to look at to kind of get a sense of how resources should be reallocated. So yeah, the opinion section of the Imprint is incredible. How do you all curate that section?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So John Kelly has been really a single-handed. Sometimes people send him stuff, sometimes he solicits stuff. I've recently putting together a database of I believe we have had, in the last 3 months alone, we have had roughly 60 opinion pieces, in the last 6 months alone. These include current and former foster youth, attorneys, social workers, public policy experts, child care providers, child welfare directors, and justice advocates. We had a phenomenal piece by Dorothy Roberts, probably our best read piece ever in the Imprint's history. She's a professor of law, sociology, and Africana studies at UPenn. And she wrote a piece about focusing on what she called the foster industrial complex. Can't be fixed, it must be abolished. We ran a piece by B.J. Walker, who ran state child welfare agencies in Georgia and Illinois. She had an interesting perspective. She said, every morning when you wake up as a child welfare director, you are scared for somebody else's children. She struck similar themes as I shared with you before. One of our most regular opinion writers is Vivek Sankaran, and he represents children and parents in his law clinic in Michigan. And he wrote a terrific piece that's on our website today, discussing how 28 million Americans are expected to lose their housing when federal protections run out during the pandemic. And that a lot of the child protective systems may get called on now. Check on this kid, check on this family. And what he's concerned about is CPS is going to intervene. As you well know, the vast majority of child welfare cases involve neglect, and the vast majority of calls to hotlines are never actually substantiated. So what he's worried about now is that there's going to be a rush of new CPS calls on kids whose families are really struggling, but CPS is not an agency. It's not a housing agency. You can't help a family housed or deal with a landlord that's evicting. And I really would like also to share with you about the stories that we've been running, because those are also cool.
Yes.
I kind of pulled a very recent selection. We have a piece on our site now, children of incarcerated parents who can't have family visits during the pandemic and how that affects them. We have Minnesota training its child welfare workers on the legal rights of Native Americans. Efforts by the Trump administration to stop compiling data on LGBTQ and American Indian foster youth. And those stories included the voices of Abby Abenanti, who is the Yurok tribal court judge in Northern California, very, very well-respected voice, and one of only 2 Native American Supreme Court justices, Justice Cal Montoya Lewis, who is a member of the Pueblo of Isleta and Pueblo of Laguna tribes from New Mexico. And we have, of course, had so much coverage that is so sad and so difficult about how COVID has ravaged the foster care communities and juvenile detention centers. And we've written some really, really heartbreaking obituaries, including the death of D. Joy, who was only 8, who was a very, very beloved national child welfare, foster care advocate who kind of spoke for the young people, and some group care workers in New York, one of whom, Eric Joseph, who died in April and was described by his surviving wife. This is a line I love, so I pulled it out. She said, "We were like peanut butter and jelly. We were left and right like a pair of eyes at the same time." So just like really, beautiful tributes to people that have passed due to COVID. We've written about outbreaks at locked psychiatric facilities for kids, kids who placed in foster care because their Mom died of COVID. We had a foster family with 18 sick children that we wrote about.
All with COVID, Karen?
Yes.
Wow.
In addition to COVID, we have managed to write about a lot of things not COVID related. State laws in New York. In New York, we're focusing a lot outside New York City on juvenile justice issues. The youth prisons are actually housed in upstate. There's a lot less coverage in upstate. And it's a really different culture there a lot of times. State laws still allow the handcuffing, arrest, and detention of 7-year-olds. We've written about a move to eliminate a language from 1992 New York state law that labels youth incorrigible. And it was a term once used on America's first lady of song, Ella Fitzgerald, when she was sent as a teenager up the Hudson River to a racially segregated group home for girls and barred from singing in the choir. So these are the history of laws on the books. We had a terrific piece on a nationwide church-based home hosting model that critics are kind of attempting to bar from New York, calling it a hydra-headed quasi-foster care monster with all of the hallmarks of foster care, but none of the legal protections the law demands. We have written about a successful push in California to defund school police. And recently, and then I will shut up, we had a really interesting piece that I worked on with Nadra Niddle, who is our freelance writer in California, who also writes for Civil Eats. And we wrote about universal screening for adverse childhood experiences, which has been really taken up statewide in California as a screening tool in doctors' pediatrics visits and even for adults, and kind of a lot of controversy surrounding that, and kind of this effort being rolled out without consideration paid to a lot of the concerns about what screening for ACEs and doctor's appointments really means. So that's some of the really cool stuff we've been doing. And I do want to say that, you know, personally, I love this place. I love these reporters. I love working with John and Kim on the editing staff. They care so deeply. They think very deeply about what they're doing and how and why. And, you know, we may not always be the quickest on the draw. We don't cover every single thing because we are a very small staff, but the things that we do cover, you will not read about them anywhere else, I guarantee you.
Yeah, I mean, the coverage is certainly more comprehensive than anything that I've read anywhere else. Tell us about one of my favorite sections of the Imprint, which is the youth voice section. Who are the people who are submitting for that?
So that is mainly handled by Fostering Media Connections, which is our parent nonprofit organization. But we have a terrific former foster youth, Raquel Wilson, who is finding young people across the country to tell stories, and we publish them on the Imprint, or they're also published by and we have, you know, when COVID first hit, we got dozens and dozens of stories published of college age youth dealing with the pandemic. And, you know, that's a really beautiful, wonderful way for you to hear directly from youth. It's not filtered by anyone else. They tell their stories in their own words. And we definitely try to publish those stories as much as we possibly can. And you will see those youth voice pieces in our op-ed pages as well.
And Karen, we were just talking about, and we all know how the pandemic has so disproportionately affected poor, mostly communities of color. How would you say the children in these communities, as well as those who are mired in the child welfare system, how has it affected them?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, because it's not really any different than it's affected all of us terribly. Like, we're all barely clinging to our fragile link with mental health, right? Except for when you're separated from your family in a foster home, if you're in a group home, if you're isolated in a juvenile hall cell, if you are in special ed and you're not getting your services, if you're in a foster home where it's hard to get enough privacy, to do your online classes. If you're a foster parent and you're trying to make sure all the kids are, if you know, how many Zoom calls can one foster parent handle to keep all your kids engaged in school? I mean, there's so many impacts, and they're just all, you know, I think the terror of the time is more acutely felt because it's you know, if you're a foster youth who's now in a dorm, we've written a lot about college students in New York who lost their dorms after this thing. They were, you know, kind of guaranteed, if you go to college, we'll have a dorm for you, we'll have housing, and then all of a sudden, you know, many of them were uprooted to make way for emergency workers and National Guard and such. And so all of a sudden, all the disruption of your life, the lack of stability, the terror about where am I going to go next is just, it really intensified what's going to happen, you know, the insecurity. I'd like to read you one piece that really struck me. It was, again, John, his connections with a fellow named David Dominici, I believe I'm pronouncing his name right, who teaches youth in juvenile halls. And he wrote this just really moving piece for us. Our students are terrified, he said. Many believe they're going to die. They're highly at risk of exposure to COVID-19, especially teenage students held in large adult jails. Thousands of children about their age are locked in juvenile detention centers and adult jails around the country right now. Nearly all visitation has been canceled. Students are alone. They see the same news we do, and they fear for their lives. Each day that passes increases the trauma, risk, real hurt, and long-term mental health scars that they will endure long after COVID-19 has passed. The majority of these students are held for non-violent offenses. Those in pretrial detention settings haven't yet had a trial or been adjudicated, yet they are held in our country's least sanitary and most dangerous institutions, institutions that simply are not designed to support individuals facing the ravages of a COVID-19 infection. So does that get a little bit at your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned that there is this reckoning that's happening in our institutions, and some positive changes taking place. You use the example of Governor Newsom coming close to putting an end to these juvenile detention facilities. But how would you say overall institutions are responding to the pressure?
Well, I think it's most specific, and you could point to actions on the juvenile justice side. I think that the release of young people from lockdown facilities is measurable, it's marked, it happened, it's happening, things seem to be okay, you know, as a result. So I think that that's kind of a measurable thing. I think on the child welfare side, from what I can tell, it's still philosophical, but still it's a huge progress for seeing a system in a different, you have to envision the system in a different way before you can actually execute real change. So we can go on like this forever, girl. You know we can, and I certainly can. But do we want to ask the folks who joined us?
Yes, let's see if we have any questions. Jessica says, I'm so grateful for the incredible work done by the Imprint. I rely on the publication daily in my work. I'm curious about why you think certain stories manage to grab the attention of policymakers. What is it about a story that helps it break through all the noise?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, honestly, there are very few policymakers who pay attention, who care, and the ones that do work very hard. I mean, honestly, I was very surprised that in all the coverage of Karen Bass as really a top VP candidate, Vice President of the United States, all the stories that were written on her, there was hardly a mention of the really extensive work she's done on child welfare and juvenile justice, mainly child welfare, foster care legislation, you know.
And Karen, why do you think that is? I mean, do you think that stories about the child welfare system are just not, they're prioritized differently? I mean, I'm confounded by that as well. Karen Bass has been so remarkable on child
Yeah.
welfare issues
Yeah,
here in
it's like,
LA.
and then you have someone like Jim Bell in the legislature who, spends his whole career, just coming up with these bills. And they're really few and far between. I think that media have a lot of impact on the local level sometimes because if your local paper or like local TV channel is writing on things, then the county supervisors will respond, will demand action. I think on the state and federal level, I think it's harder on the federal level, honestly. On the state level, I think in California, I think we have a respected press. And I think that if we just do more of the journalism, I mean, San Francisco Chronicle's work, for instance, Joaquin Palomino and Jill Tucker on Vanishing Violence, I mean, they had tremendous, tremendous impact when they wrote about the absurd cost of locking up a teeny weeny little handful of kids in these big, huge, empty, expensive juvenile halls. And, San Francisco, as we speak, is shutting down its juvenile halls. So I think there is impact. I think if we do more journalism, there'll be more. So I think it's on us. I think it's on the journalists to do more and better work and push their hand.
I have more questions. Carly is asking, I am a social worker within the foster care system, and the lip service around foster care is disheartening, to say the least. Does the Imprint do any work to share information about the need for families willing to open up their homes to children in care? Great question.
Yeah, so we write a lot about foster parents, and we have many opinions on this. Social workers, the need for foster homes. I mean, I think that has been really a bread and butter staple of our coverage. I think in our coverage, what is evolving more is kind of a way to look at taking care of kids earlier and better that doesn't rely on out-of-home care. And I think that that's where the conversation in the field and in our pages is evolving.
Jessica asks, has Imprint put pressure on the federal level to put a moratorium on youth aging out of foster care? We're getting incredible pushback in Minnesota, more so Hennepin County, stating there isn't a need for this. We're extremely worried about this population and could use pressure from all sectors, any national media, to join the initiative.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we have written a great many number of stories since that we've been publishing since January, I believe, on extended foster care. And for those of you who don't know, I think I mentioned earlier, foster care was created basically because 18-year-olds aging out of the foster care system were struggling mightily. They just had every poor outcome you could imagine. So there was federal, state, and local attempts to extend foster care to 21. And now what we're really finding is at 21, it's not enough. So we kind of broke the story early on that California had introduced to extend it through age 25. And then that hit COVID, the incredible budget deficits. And it's been scaled back now, but is still moving forward. Actually, there's a bill on the governor's desk to extend care during pandemics. But really across the country, there is this tremendous need. And unfortunately, these young adults aging out of the foster care system are competing with all these other terribly impoverished populations that now governments, state, local, and federal, are going to have to help survive.
Thanks, Karen. We have quite a few questions coming in. So Carol Biddle is asking, I love your reporting and follow your work. I'm a retired welfare executive from California, now in Georgia. I wonder about the children with intellectual and developmental challenges during COVID. They're missing the highly personal education required, are at high risk health-wise, and may not be getting placement and permanency attention required. Will you be doing any investigative work on this group? They're always the ones left farthest behind.
So thank you for that. You probably can tell us more about that population than I. What we have done so far is focused on kids with special needs and special education needs and how their caregivers are managing, and how I think in some school districts they are able to go back to classrooms where other children aren't, because they really need that in person.
And Hillary is asking, We've got a lot of people in Georgia. She's from Georgia. Thank you for sharing all this wonderful information. What would you recommend for those who don't work in child services, in the child services arena, but want to make an impact in the world of vulnerable youth? Outside of becoming a foster parent, how can we help? Any thoughts on that, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I would just open your eyes. I think there's vulnerable youth all around us, and you don't have to be a court-appointed special advocate or, just be a neighbor, be a friend, be a auntie, be a mom, be a sister. I think, it's not this other. They're not these children in the child welfare system that we need to go help and rescue. Like, they are us, we are them, and I think just seeing our world and the people around us in a more collective way. I'm sure there are many people in Georgia that would love to be your friend and get your support, especially right now.
And certainly there are many organizations there who need help and assistance. Louis is asking, are there opportunities for current and former foster youth to become freelancers? As a former foster youth and Politico fellow, I love the idea of submitting op-eds, but would love to do some deeper journalism on certain beats within foster care.
Louis, my email is kdesa@imprintnews.org. Email me immediately. And tell all your friends to email me. Yes, we need.
Do it, Louis.
We are trying. And that has been a real goal of Fostering Media Connections. We definitely want young people freelancing for us, and we definitely want to help train foster youth to be journalists. So 100% do it.
Start working on that, Louis. Andrea is asking, in the beginning you mentioned that there are beats in journalism, such as politics and court crime, but no beat for safety net and social services. For folks who work in PR and communications, how can we help reporters be more steeped in this issue when their beat might be crime?
Tell them to read the Imprint.
Okay, you can tell them. Let's see, I have Jean Ferguson who's asking, I'm a social worker too, who's hungry for deep and pervasive change within the system. Are you aware of and interested in the upend movement that is originating out of the University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work and the Center for the Study of Social Policy? Dean Alan Detlef is publicizing his effort. This seems to be very resonant with the aim of your work. Are you familiar with this, Karen?
Well, we've actually written about Mr. Detlef and that movement, the movement for family power. And if you email me, I can send you the links to the stories we've done on this. We have been writing about this, and it's a fascinating, when I think I wasn't that articulate when I described this particular phenomenon, so let me give it another try. The movement in a kind of bold, in-your-face way says, abolish the child welfare system. And that sounds like, what is that? The thinking behind it is concerns about the federal law that puts parents on this 15 to 22 month timeline to either do everything the court asks of you or have your parental rights terminated, right? And just the notion that poor families are often policed, okay? I may get this wrong, but I believe it's 1 in 10 African-American children will get a CPS call on them in their lifetimes. Please don't hold me to any numbers or facts or figures I say on this Zoom, because I like to write things down and fact check. But, the whole notion of the kind of punitive process that parents and kids get put on, and the notion of surveillance and how can we flip the script so that the issues that are most often at issue when child welfare workers go out to investigate are poverty, it's neglect, it's housing, it's food, it's proper health care, right? It's transportation, it's childcare. It's all the basic things that, Lisa, you and I could never do our jobs if we didn't have. We could never do our jobs if we didn't have a place to live. We could never raise our kids properly if we didn't have enough food for them, right? We also cannot deny that these struggles are happening in a system of historic and systemic injustice. So we can't say to that parent, oh, you don't have food, you don't have money? Well, guess what? Your kid is in danger by you. So we might have to take your kid. even to be asked those questions. Think how terrifying it would be for you. You know, you look, my daughter hid in the carousel of the department store once in the middle of the thing in Macy's, and I couldn't find her for 5 seconds. And you know that feeling, right? You know the feeling.
Total panic. Yeah, absolutely.
Total panic. So these are parents just like you and I. And so that's what's really fascinating is there a way that we could support struggling families, help them, and rather than being a child removal system? Do you know what I mean? Because look, there are cases, like everyone knows, we all know there are cases where children are not safe at home and they need immediate rescue. Like that is, but those are the very, very small minority. Those are not the bread and butter cases of child welfare organizations.
Tiffany is asking, so many children are in need of quality caregivers. Does the Imprint do any work related to recruiting high quality caregivers?
Okay, so we're a news outlet. Yeah, so we do journalism. We're not involved in direct services, but we publish pieces and we write about direct service provision.
Great. As far as you know, Mary is asking, is there any jurisdiction out there that does a good job of providing legal counsel to parents in dependency cases?
That is a great question. Thank you for it. And you will, if you read the Imprint today, you will see that we have done the second piece. It is actually a published scientific article on what works in parent representation, and it's out of the New York University Law School. And they have done really, really premier work both on what works for parent advocacy and the models, and they've written off that, and they're I think they're kind of the gold standard right now, but there's a tremendous firm in East Bay in California. There's amazing work being done in pockets really across the country, and there's a lot of places where parent advocacy is really, really lacking. And I think that's the story more than anything, because the problem with the social worker, the government, state having a powerful, effective, polished attorney with lots of support, lots of low caseloads and loss of investigative capacity, facing off with an attorney for a child and parent who have few resources, high caseloads, terrible pay, not enough resources, is that you're deciding children's lives in an unequal and unjust courtroom setting, right? And so that's why the parent advocacy piece is so important, because it means children and families are well represented in these cases.
Thanks, Karen. Just wanted to let everyone know, we don't have that much time left, and there are a lot of messages here in the chat, and we so appreciate you. There's so many incredible comments and a lot of questions. We're probably not going to get to all. In fact, I know we're not going to get to a lot of these questions, but hopefully you will find a lot of your answers in the Imprint. Like I said, there really is no publication like it, and it is dedicated to covering issues pertaining to vulnerable children and families. I mean, there is no other publication who does what they do. So I'm going to quickly get to maybe 2 more questions. Karen, are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, this is a good one from Steve. I'm a reporter focusing on the foster care system through 2021. I'll be in touch soon. The most difficult thing about this beat is how multi-layered it is. All the different agencies that comprise, quote, the system. Each state, sometimes each country's systems vary too. And the fact that so much of what happens in foster care happens in the dark. The court system is closed almost, but not quite everywhere. How important do you think it is to open the courts in a way that honors privacy concerns of children and families, but also open them for information?
It's 100% important. And the Imprint, which some of you may know was previously called the Chronicle of Social Change, has written on this extensively. And I myself have, done a lot of speaking on this issue, because anytime you are functioning in a secretive court with no transparency, then, we all know what happens in an unwatched system. And I will tell you myself, from having to get special permission to sit in on dependency courts, I've had judges tell me afterwards, wow, Karen, like just having you sit there, like I saw through your eyes and it changed my whole perspective, so like 100% important to note in all your stories that these are confidential cases, and to push and to ask judges for special permission. It is possible to protect the identity of children and parents and still write about their cases. And look, if they're extreme cases, they're going to be in the criminal courts anyway, and there's not going to be any privacy.
I'm unfortunately going to only be able to take one more question, but again, we really appreciate you all logging onto this webinar and the comments that you've submitted, as well as the questions. I wish I could get to all of them, but unfortunately we just don't have the time. So Andre is asking, you've been instrumental in creating systemic change. Love your work, Karen. Will you be looking at ways to close the front door of entry to reduce the disproportionality of African-American kids and reimagine the foster care system to become a place of healing versus hurting?
So if that's Andre Chapman, you do that work and we will write about it.
It is Andre Chapman.
And you know that. I know what you do. And then now I edit the stories about what folks like you do. But yeah, Andre has been on the front lines of this for many, many years. And look, honestly, I hope that nothing I said is any kind of slight on the dedicated child welfare workers, good group care providers, foster parents. Everyone in this system is definitely trying to do the right thing. I've been on ride-alongs, as you have, Lisa, with emergency response workers in LA. It's heartbreaking work, very, very important. These are very kind, well-meaning people. And I think, a lot of this stuff is deep systemic and historic injustice, which it's not fair to ask a CPS worker to be able to solve. It's what we all have to solve. And the lens that that the Black Lives Matter movement is now bringing to criminal justice and policing, is going to help this world also reevaluate a better, safer, more humane way to govern a society.
Well, I said it before, Karen, we, on behalf of everyone at FMC and I think on behalf of everyone who has watched this webinar, we're so thrilled that you have taken the helm at the Imprint. Thank you to the entire staff for your tireless work. And to you who are watching today, look, we've been talking about how big of an impact these stories, like the ones that Imprint does, can have, which ultimately really benefit children and families. And there is no media outlet like this one. And readers like you make it all possible through donations, really. So if you want to help keep this going, it's important work, you can visit news.org/donate. It's there on the screen. Many of you have already donated, and for that, we thank you. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and continue to support the Imprint because they're doing really extraordinary work. Thank you all, and have a great day.